Hello and welcome to this episode of the podcast, The Julie Poole Show. Thank you so much for being here. And today we have the lovely Danielle Saranke. Is that the way you pronounce it? Or Sarank?
Sarank. Sarank.
Okay. All right. Sarank. Okay. I do apologize. Danielle is the Squamish medium, and you can find her on squamishmedium.com. And her channel is all about, her website is all about spiritual and personal empowerment. And Danielle says her calling is to help you remember your power within. And she describes herself as a professional spiritual medium, mentor, educator, and Indigenous entrepreneur. So, Danielle, thank you. Welcome, welcome. Tell us about you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that intro. I'm a big fan, as you know, of your show, so I really appreciate you having me on. So I guess to add to that, I'm a mother of two. I would say my spiritual journey really started after the birth of my first child in 2013, which was a
Right.
huge pivotal time for me. And so I live in a small mountain town in Western Canada with my two kids, my very skeptical husband, who is an engineer mind, a scientific mind. So he keeps me incredibly grounded. And we have a little rescue pooch from Tijuana named Luna, who's pretty much the mascot of Spirit School. Yeah, and yeah, I'm First Nations. I've lived in the West Coast my entire life. I felt very called to this little small town, and I started my practice here in 2017. And I started a podcast in 2018, and the podcast turned into an online school, which is now expanding into an actual physical school that I'm building right now. So
Wow, yeah, I
lots
saw
of
that
big
on your
changes.
website. You've got a building going live in May, is it?
Yeah, we're in middle of construction right now.
And I saw that you do retreats as well. So is that going to be where you're going to hold the retreats, or are you already having the retreats?
Yeah, I'm having my first retreat in April. So just almost exactly 2 months from now. And it was interesting because I've had a membership community for medium and psychic development, lightworkers, for 3 years now. And so now that things have opened up, because I started it during COVID, like the rest of the world, everyone really just wanted to meet together. So it was actually a very painful exercise trying to find a retreat space. And it took
Right.
me about 2 years. I had to book one and wait 2 years for my time slot to come up. And my retreat almost sold out in 12 hours. So I was like, okay,
Wow.
people really want to come meet me in person, meet each other in person. And the next retreat location I was able to secure was 2026. So it was quite a few years out. So I was like, well, this is silly. Like maybe I can find an office or something. And as you can see, I'm working in my bedroom. So I've done everything from the side of my bed.
Yeah.
And so I went on this journey of trying to find a space, and I found this incredible space that was unlisted, completely empty on the ocean front in Squamish. There's only 3 oceanfront commercial spaces, and it was so divinely experienced. Like it was just a complete unfoldment that came so easy. I got a grant that covered the construction costs. The landlord ended up being absolutely incredible. One of my clients is a contractor, and her daughter just finished design school. So I got a package deal with them. Like everything about this space has just been unfolding so easily. And I've already had international teachers from Australia and Scotland and Arizona want to rent my space for their own
Wow.
retreat. So yeah, so 40 people maximum. It's going to be very boutique style, but it's a huge expansion for me, and I'm very nervous, but I'm very excited as well.
Well, it's clearly divinely led, isn't it? I mean, if I've looked at your website, the photographs of your area, it's oh my goodness me, my heart just said I have to go there. It's just phenomenally beautiful,
It
absolutely
is.
beautiful. So geographically, you're in Canada, but you're not that far up from Seattle. I'm in England, so I know where Seattle is.
Yeah.
I've got a few clients around Seattle. So how far north are you from there?
Well, if you're not counting borderline up wait time, it's probably about a 2.5, 3 hour drive. Like I used to get a PO box in the States because our dollar was worth more when my daughter was born. So we used to go down to the States to buy everything. So it was just a
Yeah.
quick day trip down to the States. So I'm about 45 minutes north of Vancouver, British Columbia, and about
Yeah.
45 minutes south of Whistler, which is where the 2010 Olympics were.
Right.
So yeah, it's a beautiful place. Squamish is so powerful. We are completely surrounded by gorgeous mountain landscapes. We're on the ocean. You're just being nuzzled in by Mother Nature here. When I traveled all the time, I used to get really hungry for nature because I didn't realize how much we had here until I started traveling around. And we're also home of the northern bald eagles. So you can't go out of your house without seeing eagles flying in the sky or perched up in the trees. And it's just stunning here. I'll never leave.
Oh, wow. It's amazing. So that's where the name come from then, that the Squamish medium. So the town is
Yeah.
called Squamish,
Yeah,
right?
Squamish. And Squamish in the local traditional language means mother winds. So you
Wow.
can set
Okay.
your clock to the winds here in Squamish at 1 p.m., especially in the summertime. So it's a very popular place for kite surfing. It's the outdoor recreational capital of Canada. So we have lots of rock climbing, mountain biking, windsurfing, sailing. So yeah, it's a fantastic part of the world, very rich and abundant and just in
Beautiful.
nature. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds amazing. So you got into this about 10 years ago then, your first child's coming sort of 10.
Yeah.
So has it been a rapid curve for you?
Well, looking back, I think time is such a weird concept because looking back, it feels like a blink of an eye. But I feel like my journey to becoming a professional medium was actually quite a slow one because
Right.
I was really lacking that personal power. I didn't realize the insecurities that would come up on the development path. Like, oh, I actually want to be right. Like, oh, like there's a lot at stake here. Oh, this is a very vulnerable craft, and so my unfoldment into mediumship was quite fascinating because I had my daughter and I just ended up with a ticket to go see a medium work in Squamish. Just one ticket. My best friend came over, watched my girl so I could go. And I was the first one to get a contact. And it was a really mind blowing experience. So I told my friend about it, who was watching my daughter, who bought me a private reading with this medium. And it was actually this medium that said, you could do this. And I was like, no. Like I worked with race cars back then. I was in First Nations health and healing as well. And I just never in a million years thought like I was a medium. And so she just said, well, come to one of my development classes. And I was so convinced I wasn't a medium. I didn't sign up for her mediumship class. I signed up for her just like basic psychic development class. And that
Right.
first day we went, and I had to drive, it was a 5-hour round trip to go to these classes. It was a huge investment for me in time and money. And
Yeah.
yeah, the first class, just two of us showed up. And she said, I just want to try something. Close your eyes, tell me what you see. And I was able to bring through this young man, and I got his name for the woman, and she just like grabbed me and she was like, oh, what did you just say? And I said the name. And I got really scared with the intensity because I could feel her grief in that moment as well.
Yeah.
And it was like my first contact was like a mom who had just lost a son 8 months before. And the weight of the responsibility was really apparent for me in that moment. So though it was a very exciting experience, it was also one that showed me like the gravity of working with people with grief, of the healing that mediumship can bring through. And so I took my path a little bit too seriously at the beginning. I had to learn to lighten up after a couple years, but I
Yeah.
really took the slow and steady development path. I developed for 4 years in a private circle before I started serving the public. So in that way, it was slow, but it was an exciting journey. I enjoyed every minute of it. And for the first few years, I didn't even intend on being a medium. I was very happy in my career. It's just
Yeah.
how things ended up unfolding. But when I look back at my life, I was always interested in mediums. Like I watched John Edwards on TV in high school. I read all of Sylvia Browne's books in high school. Like, I can see looking back how signs were there that this would maybe be a possibility for me, but not until I was 31. Then I
Yeah.
did that first sitting that I realized like, oh, this is something.
Wow. Right. So let's just explain for our listeners who perhaps don't understand the difference between a psychic and a medium. So I am not a medium. So, even though I've been doing this for best part now of 50 years, I don't connect with dead people, which is
Mm,
what I define a medium is. Now, I know there's no such thing as death. We know that. But I mean that a passed on loved one that is no longer in the physical, is now in spirit.
Mm.
And this is what in the UK we define a medium as somebody who connects with passed on loved ones to bring them messages and healing to those that have left behind, to give them reassurances that their loved one is okay. And also in terms of messages for the person, not just that they're okay, but that person is watching over them, is often around them, and can see what's going on in their life. So we can get kind of, oh, your car broke down Wednesday and your mum wants to tell you XYZ kind of thing, which can be extremely powerful and positive. So that's the way that you work then. This is what you do?
Yeah, that's primarily what I do. I didn't get into psychic development until I started doing private sittings and people started asking me about themselves. I'm like, oh, shoot, like I never developed this part. I only speak with the discarnate, right? The
Yeah.
deceased loved ones. And I love that saying, I talk to dead people, because when I try to tell people, I'm like, they're actually a lot more alive than we are. Like our energy feels dead in comparison to their
Absolutely.
energy.
And they've got such a lot more knowledge than we have because they have that perspective from the other side.
Yeah.
I personally, I don't work as a medium, and people will often book a reading with me, and I've got a big notice saying, I do not connect with your passed on loved ones. That is not what I do. It happens occasionally for me, but predominantly my job as a psychic or intuitive is I connect with the person's soul, higher self, spiritual team, and I'm through that able to look at where they've been, where they are, and where they're going.
Mhm.
But it's very rare that I'll get your mum wants me to tell you XYZ. It's coming through from the higher self and the soul in terms of the spiritual path, which is, and the spiritual path is also the life path. You know, you're not just living a spiritual life, you're living a human life. So it's kind of pulling those two things together. And I'm frankly in awe of mediums. I mean, I watched the show The Medium with Alison Dubois religiously. I have watched every single episode of that show all the way through the last 10, 15, 20 years. I can't remember when it started. It's finished now in the UK, and I don't think she does it anymore. But I mean, I know she's still a medium, but I don't think the show is running. I learned I wouldn't say a lot. I certainly learned a bit from the show, but I'd read books from Doris Stokes and mediums back when I was like 13. I mean,
Yeah.
we're going back now into the 70s. I was reading those books. I never had that connection. So how did it feel when you were starting to connect with somebody's loved one?
Mm. Well, first, I just have to say, you just mentioned Doris Stokes, and I literally have like 5 tabs up right now of her mediumship because I love to still study mediumship, and she was such a wonderful clairaudient medium. So I'm a
Yeah.
huge Doris Stokes fan myself. I'm going to be using her as a teaching tool in my advanced mediumship class this week because her
Great.
mediumship was just so phenomenal, and her presentation was just so honest. And I think
Yeah.
that for me, she's a good example. So the funny thing is for me, when I made that first connection and my teacher said, "Oh, that you just made a mediumship connection," my first response was, "That was it?" And she was like, "That's it." And I was like,
Yeah.
"That's so subtle." And I think that is one of the things I talk about in my beginning mediumship development class, which is, don't be surprised at how subtle it is, because sometimes, like I used to watch Derek Acora on TV, like Most Haunted was a big show I watched in high school, and it was like all very dramatic and very physical. And
That's
I
show
think
business. That's not the way it is in real life.
I know, but as a young kid, you're just like, I'm never going to be a medium because like this is what it's like. I'm not being like overshadowed and like overtaken. And that's what I thought it was. And when I first started connecting, I realized, wow, it's really subtle. And a lot of the development journey is actually increasing your sensitivity and your awareness of yourself and your own energy, your own thoughts, so that you can discern spirit's thoughts, spirit's impressions. Because when you're in a reading at the beginning, especially, it's very subtle. And then as you build the power, as you get more connected, as your confidence grows and your client's confidence grows, and then you really start to feel the presence of spirit. And if you can get out of your own way long enough, you can actually transmute that presence of spirit to your sitter, and they can also feel them, which is something that doesn't translate very well on TV, but is one of my favorite part of the sessions, is when people say, I just felt like feeling shifted, like I felt feeling a little bit more healed. And that's because we were able to create an atmosphere of the presence
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
loved one, which I think is quite magical. It's not sexy
Um,
for TV, but
no, it's not,
good.
is it? But it's absolutely right. I remember back in probably around 2002, 2003, I was running a lot of spiritual classes and I had 3 going a week. And I remember this one guy, and he sat in the class week after week and we'd say, do you get anything? No. Do you get anything this week? No. And I would put them in a meditative space, and I would encourage them to connect with their higher selves and their angelic team and follow the guidance. And each week he'd say, no, I just sat there, I'm okay. So in the end, he booked a personal one-to-one with me and said, why can't I connect? So I took him through on a one-to-one rather than a group basis. And I said to him, so can you see the path in front of you? No. What can you see? I see a butterfly. Hallelujah. What do you want to do? Do you want to follow the butterfly? I don't know. Should I? I said, well, what do you think? Well, I guess so. Well, follow the butterfly then. And it was as simple as that. Because I said to them all in the group, allow a path to open up in front of you and follow the path. He didn't see a path. He saw a butterfly, but he wasn't noticing, or he wasn't following his own inner guidance. He was, well, Julie said, there's a path. I've got to find a path. And he couldn't find a path. So once I gave him that little breakthrough to say, it is subtle. If you see a butterfly, if you see anything, you follow what you see. And that little subtle shift just allows everything to open up. And from there on in, he was great. He was good to go. Off he went. So yeah, that subtlety is hugely important, isn't it?
It
so
is.
I want to ask about the spirit school then. So you've talked a little bit about the actual physical school opening and that you're going to be doing retreats there, but you also do this spirit school where you bring together who are you bringing together? What are you doing there?
Yeah, spirit school is something kind of interesting because in 2017, every meditation I had, this was even just as I was coming out as a professional medium in my town, which went really well when I first started. I didn't have a website, didn't have social media. I was booking like a year and a half out, like people just word of mouth, like wildfire, were like coming. And I kept getting this like spirit school, spirit school, spirit school. And I knew I wanted to be a podcast because I was obsessed with podcasts. And I was like, that's my jam. And I was trying to convince one of my best friends to do it with me, but she didn't like the name spirit school. And so I was like, I have to go on my own then, because I am just so tunnel vision about this. Like, it just has to be spirit school. So I launched my podcast in December 2018 after a nervous breakdown in my corporate career. I kind of had one of those F it moments where I'm like, I'm not wasting any more time. Up until that point, I had been recording podcast episodes, but deleting them right away because my confidence in myself just wasn't there. And I think that the premise of my whole podcast was because none of my teachers were willing to be vulnerable enough to talk about this side of it, like the not enoughness, the comparing yourself, the never thinking like it's good enough, like, did I do enough? Is it enough? Did I charge too much? Like, no one was willing to talk about that side of it. And that's what I was plagued with in my journey. That's what kept me staying really small for 4 years. So I was like, you know what? I have a job. I'm going to launch this podcast. I'm going to be the vulnerable one. I'm going to put myself out there and talk about like the insecurities that come up on the development path. So Spirit School originally started as a podcast that talks about the vulnerable humanity and the human side of mediumship development. And so it was interesting when I launched it. I didn't tell anyone I launched it. I just kind of let people find it. And it started off with like 5 downloads. And then within 6 months, I was getting like 50 downloads. And then, a couple of years later, now I'm getting, 30, 40,000 downloads a month. And it ended up that through the podcast, about a year and a half in, I had people from around the world messaging me saying, hey, do you do mentorship online? I was like, let's try it. Like, I don't know yet.
Wow.
Let's see how it goes. And so people just started approaching me from my podcast, asking me to teach and mentor them. So that kind of is how my teaching career started online. And then I started doing group programs because the one-on-one, it became really hard to manage like all these one-on-one. So I started doing group programs. And it kind of occurred to me like, well, maybe Spirit School is actually a school. I mean, it took me years. Okay. I'm a bit of a slow study if you don't know yet. So in 2020, I was like, I think I have a school here. Like, I think that this is a school. So I started doing programs, not so much under the Squamish Medium brand, but under Spirit School brand.
Spirit
And the
School.
reason why I called myself Squamish Medium was because I was working in First Nations politics and I actually wasn't qualified for my job. They were taking a chance on me because they saw something in me, and I'm so grateful for them that they did. But my reputation was everything to me. So I wasn't willing to risk that, which is how come I built my career under the brand Squamish Medium. And I did come out in 2017 to them, and they were nothing but supportive around it. So I started the online school, Spirit School, which is a membership community for, I think we have 124 members right now, all around the world, who want to develop not just mediumship, but psychic, angel. We have it framework so that they get a lot of practice, because I think that's the only way you really develop, is being in the arena. You can listen to all the classes, all the philosophy, but you have to be in the arena to
It's
kind of
like a
understand
muscle,
it.
isn't it? The more you practice, the stronger it gets. Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, it's morphed into an online school that has become a little bit well known, like in the mediumship space in particular. So now it's morphing into an actual physical school, which I think was the original dream, because I do have a meditation recorded in my journal. I have development journals which form my podcast. I kept every single one of them, every single one of them. And I have an entry from 2014 about a Squamish waterfront storefront that I would have. And back then there was no waterfront. It was all just forest. And so I think, looking back, the dream has always been to have a physical school, but I just couldn't see it as clearly until this past year. And actually that's when I got a reading with you. I'm like, I'm about to sign a lease, like a 5-year lease. Like, is this gonna work? Like,
Yeah, you mentioned that you had a reading with me last year. So how did that help you then? Was it reassurance that you needed? What was going on there?
well, I think they're all validating. I think that's the difference between mediumship and psychic work. Like, mediumship is evidential in the sense where it should be evidential at the very least, right? Where you bring through evidence. It's like, either I know this or I don't. You got to try to be as specific as possible. And some pieces of evidence might appear to be a bit vague, and others a little bit more detailed, but there's that evidence. And then with the psychic work, it's like, does this resonate? And like, there's like this soul experience that just like, it's like this knowing, like, yes, this absolutely resonates. So I've been watching your YouTube videos for a long time. I post about them all the time on Instagram. I can't find you on Instagram, by the way. I'm like, I
I'm
want to
not
tag
on
you.
Instagram. No, I'm not on Instagram.
I'm like, I want to tag you, but I'm trying to send people to your YouTube page.
Thank you so
And
much. But no, I tried Instagram and I got hacked within the first few weeks, and
yeah,
I tried to get Facebook to sort it.
they
And
don't care.
instead of banning the hacker, they banned me. So
Yeah.
I'd have to start all over again. And I just went, do you know what? I've got YouTube, I've got Facebook. That's enough. I'm just going to leave it go. So yes, I'm not on Instagram, but thank you so much anyway. But yeah, carry on. So I gave you some direction to support the decisions that you'd already made. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the monthly ones that you do, because I'm also a fellow Virgo, I mean, they felt like they were like literally speaking to me like every point of the way, because I first saw this space in September, and like every month. So by November, I think it was, I was like, I just need to book in one of those readings. So it was like where I submitted a question, I get a video back, which is my favorite format to get readings, by the way. And the first thing you said is you called this in. And it was like literally just after I found my journal entry from 2014 about how, like, yeah, I think I've seen this all along. So you did, it was absolutely reassuring. The funny thing was, though, is that I booked it so that I was trying to get the reading before I signed the lease, like looking for like a safety net. But of
Yeah.
course, the way my path always goes, I'm always having to make these decisions on my own. Like, even though we have these connections to spirit teams, we still have to take that initiative. We still have to do the scary things ourselves. And so the reading actually came the day after I had to sign. So I had to do it anyways. And then the reading came in and I was like, felt very comforted by it. I'm like, this is the right decision. It will be okay. One thing you did say, which will be interesting, was that a potential move or shift or sale coming up 6 months in. It's funny because one of the clauses I took out of the lease agreement, which they're very robust, these things, was that they could not move me. I was like, you are not allowed to move me. And then you mentioned it the next day. So funny enough, I actually put it in my clause that they can't move me because I'm building this place from scratch. So yeah. So anyways, it was very comforting. You're very in tune. And I haven't had too many psychic readings myself, but like, you're very, very in tune. So I love sharing you with my audience.
Thank you. Let's just explain for our audience, why would a psychic or a medium, i.e. you and me, go elsewhere for a reading. I do. I go to other people for a reading. I've had a reading with Rath from Radiant Reality, and I've had a reading with Zeta Zuri. And I had an amazing reading in December with an astrologer who does soul readings based on astrology called Emily. I will probably get one reading a year unless I'm going through significant change, and then I might look elsewhere for a little bit more reassurance. So why is it that we would go elsewhere? For myself, and you might have a different answer to this, but for myself, I find that I am extremely accurate and detailed for a complete stranger. And that's not a problem at all. But as soon as it's somebody close to me, my own desires, my own concerns get in the way. So if I'm doing a reading for my daughter or any close friend, I know them really well, and it's very easy to misinterpret, or basically for the reading not to be clean. It needs to be clean and pure. And the less I know, the better, because then I know that all the information coming through is not from me, because I don't know. It's coming from my spiritual team. So when I'm trying to do a reading for myself, I can feel into a yes or a no. I can feel into answers. The problem is that the information that I get via my third eye, my crown, it's going through my mind and out through my mouth. And because it's got to go through my mind and out through my mouth to communicate, it's got to go through my desires, which contaminate. And I found that my own readings to myself are notoriously inaccurate because of my desires getting in the way. So it's cleaner for me to go to somebody else who doesn't know me. And once they know me, I don't want to go to them because they know too much about me. And I chose Raf from Radiant Reality. And I didn't put it through my business name, Julie Poole, online. I just put Julie Poole. I could be anybody. And he didn't know me. And when I came on and it was a live reading, he didn't recognize me. He didn't say, "Do I know you?" You know, generally, most readers on YouTube don't necessarily watch other YouTube readers. He'd never heard of me. And he was spot on in terms of what he knew so far and the present. And then he gave me a lot of detail for the next few years. So we'll wait to see whether that comes about. So what about yourself? Is it the same sort of reading the same reason that you would go for somebody else for a reading, because you can't get it clean for yourself?
Absolutely. I mean, I always say that the prerequisite to mediumship is a life well lived, because we need to have all these different references to be able to call upon. And so there aren't very many examples out there of mediums who have had squeaky clean, easy lives. A lot of people come from, colorful pasts. And so it's just evidential to show you divorces, addictions, like we make bad decisions, and we make decisions that are not necessarily in alignment or easy. And no, I don't think that you can read for yourself clearly, and very much the same for me. I don't read for friends or family mediumistically either, because one of the ways of connecting clearly through mediumship is not having attachment and surrendering, just like psychic. And it's really hard when you have a grieving friend in front of you to not be attached to outcome. And then plus with your friends and family, like, you do care what they think more than like a stranger. So it's really hard to get to that place of being completely detached. And a couple of things about getting readings, like, one, they're business expense for me. Right? Probably same for you as well. Two, I think it's a really generous way to kind of also share. Like, I felt like with you too, like, you give so much for free on your YouTube channel. And like, I get so much from it. It's like, I believe so much. It's part of my Indigenous culture to have like the law of reciprocity. And so for me too, I also like to purchase readings from people who give so much out in the public, because it's like that, reciprocal energy. And it's like, if I could support Julie at all, even if it's like, one of these sessions, I think that that's very abundant and thoughtful and kind, right? So I do invest from readings from people that I watch their forecasts and stuff like that too, because I think it's a good exchange.
Wow, that's lovely. Yeah, you're right. It is a lovely exchange. It is. So, Danielle, you were saying that you had this health crisis at work, and that's what shifted it forward. It's what I call the breaking point day. I also had one in 1999, 2000, which is what got me out of the business world and into doing my path. We have these health crisis or emotional crisis or some kind of aha breakthrough moment or breakdown moment. I see it as a breakthrough. So tell us about yours. What happened?
Oh my goodness. Yes, I was in corporate. So I started working. I used to work with race cars my whole life. I fell into it right after high school. I loved it. I loved the sport. I loved the traveling. I loved the team energy. I loved that it was always small businesses, very grassroots. And I ended up getting headhunted by an Indigenous organization that was trying to bring health equality from non-Indigenous people to Indigenous people, because healthcare for First Nations people in Canada is 20 steps below all other cultures in Canada, still to this day. And so this
Okay.
organization was trying to turn that around, and they headhunted me just because I had some lived experience about how connecting to culture can actually heal a lot of things like addictions and,
Yeah.
trauma. Connecting with culture is like a huge key piece to like living well. And so I written an essay on it that ended up getting published. And so they headhunted me to come work for this organization. So I was like, I think the 30th hire. Now, fast forward quite a few years, I built a reputation in this industry and it started to grow and expand. And by the time I left, to give you an example, there's over 1,400 people, and about 30% of the organization was First Nations at that time. So as it kind of grew, people who were old school like me really struggled with turning from like this grassroots social justice mission to being government corporate. So personally for me, I really struggled because I never wanted to work in government. I never wanted to work in corporate. And I found myself, on my spare time, meditating, connecting with spirit, like having beautiful, meaningful exchanges with other human beings, and then going to my desk to plug away at spreadsheets and deal with interpersonal conflict with people who have no
It's
interest
so
in
clear to
healing.
see it just didn't fit you anymore. It did fit in the beginning,
Yeah.
and then it had grown, you had grown, and you were no longer aligned. I talk
Yeah.
about this a lot on my channel and in my book, that something that used to fit and it felt good, we can outgrow and it doesn't feel good anymore. So you were sensing and picking up, this isn't a good fit for me anymore. It's gone from 30 people to 1,400 people. I don't feel that I'm aligned with their ethos or their business model or anything, but I feel a sense of loyalty and I'm confused and I don't know what to do. And so we end up in this head spin
Yeah.
of needing to give ourselves permission to leave, but not quite knowing how to give ourselves permission to leave. So that breaking point is the permission. So
Yeah.
what happened with you for that?
Well, it was because we ended up with leadership that just didn't get what we were trying to do. And they were just extracting everything that they could get out of you with like nothing in exchange. And so what ended up happening was at a work retreat, I had a toxic conflict with our VP of our department at the time. And I mean, I flew out of that place. And by the time I got into my car, I'd never had this happen to me before, but I had an anxiety attack. And I was on the side of the road, like hyperventilating in my car for about 3 hours. I couldn't drive, I couldn't move. I still had a long way to get home. It was actually really heartbreaking, even to think about how far I let it go to snap. Because the other thing, too, is, I grew up in severe poverty. I was reliant on churches to feed me. And so the golden handcuffs that this organization gave me was like really hard to think that I could support myself doing this work, even though I had a lot of evidence. I mean, I was booking so far out, people wanted readings, but I also didn't want to charge astronomical prices either, because you probably know, like, you can sit at a desk for 8 hours, but you can't necessarily do readings for 8 hours,
No, you can't.
right?
Yeah.
So you can't. So my mind just couldn't get there because I had a pension plan. I was tax exempt. I was making over 6 figures, and I had a really expensive mortgage and 2 kids. And I think that it was actually like the decision making coupled with being treated so poorly that I just snapped, and I ended up in the hospital and having severe heart palpitations, and I was taken out of work for 3 months. And I went back for one day. This is such a sad story, Julie, but I went back for one day after a 3 month hiatus to recover. And there were
Yeah.
grown men crying in the hallways. And I was like, I need out. So
Yeah.
I submitted my resignation that day. And the CEO, a week later, messaged me, and he was like, "Can I take you out for lunch?" He's like, "We really need Indigenous mothers here. We need your voice. We need your perspective. What do you want?" And I gave them an impossible standard. I'm like, I don't want to work full time, but I don't want to cut my pay. I don't want to come into the office. I only want to work for this person. I only want this project. And they gave me everything that I
Wow,
asked
they really
for.
wanted to keep you. You were being tempted, weren't you? So
No, I stayed. I rescinded my resignation because the other thing that happened, this is such a funny story, but on the mediumship side, my third mentor went born again Christian. Literally from the time I resigned to that meeting with the CEO, in between that time, my third mentor sent out an email saying she had an experience with Jesus. She was mediumship was a path of the devil. Like literally my third mentor. So that really
Doreen
shook.
Virtue all over again. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So my first mentor and Doreen at the same month went born again. Anyways, long story short. So I was like in this time of self-doubt. So I ended up going against my judgment, staying, thinking that it was meant to be because it came so easy. And it was the same pattern that happened a whole year later. I ended up thinking I was losing my eyesight and I was going blind. And it happened for so long that like I even came to terms with the fact like, okay, I can still do mediumship blind. I actually don't need to see at
Rather
all.
than just step back and say, an issue with the eyes is what aren't I seeing? Yeah, exactly. And as soon as I open my eyes to see what I need to see and stop, because we are the masters of denial and
Yeah.
deception. I can convince myself black is white. I am absolutely guilty of this. But the body will show us,
Oh,
if I
yes.
get an earache, what aren't I hearing? If I get my eyes are drying up, and everybody will say to me, oh, that's to do with eyes, just get yourself some eye drops. I will step back from that and say, no, what aren't I seeing? What aren't
Yeah.
I looking at? I need to look at things. So eventually then you did walk away and you said, I can do this. I've got
Yeah.
enough faith in myself to say, we can do this. Often what happens, I find, is that people's lives have to get more and more uncomfortable to the point where it's really painful before they make the change. For
Mm.
myself, I've been in business, in the business world, if you like, for about 15 years. And I didn't really know my teenage boys because I was never home. And when I was home, I was knackered. And my daughter, I had a late child at 34. Oh, it's not late these days, but it was then. When she was 2, I had my breaking point day when I went to the nursery to pick her up and she wouldn't come to me.
Mm.
She ran to she was actually in the nursery nurse's arms, and I went to take her and she wouldn't come to me. She
Yeah.
wanted to stay there. And that broke my heart. That was my breaking point day. And I'd been having absolute messages for about a year. It's time to go. Just let it go. Just
Yeah.
walk away. Just do something else. We'll show you. We'll train you. We'll guide you where to go. And that was the day that was my breaking point day. And I went into work the next day and resigned without a job to go to. There was no turning back.
Yeah.
And I started packing up my house and arranging to move to somewhere cheaper and smaller. And I said, whatever I'm going to do next,
Yeah.
I know that I won't be on this kind of income. So I need to cut my cloth accordingly.
Yeah.
But my quality of life is more important than anything else. And
Yeah.
even if I have to work a part-time job, I'll have the afternoons with my daughter. That's what happened. I got myself a part-time job on 16 hours, 4 mornings a week. And I spent the afternoons with my daughter playing and getting to know each other because she didn't really know me, and having proper time and retraining as a hypnotherapist and allowing my spiritual teachings to go forward, and started classes and everything else similarly to you. But like you were saying there, we have these beliefs when we've been in business, and I wasn't on 6 figures, but I was on reasonable money at the time because this was over 20 years ago. And I just had this absolute belief that I can't earn anything like that as a hypnotherapist, as a spiritual teacher. And that belief, I didn't even realize was there for a good 10 years. I just aligned with, I'm happy to live on less. And I live in Cornwall, which is a beautiful part of England. And I live by the sea. And I thought, okay, I can't afford holidays abroad like I used to have, and flash cars and all the rest of that. But I'm happier than I've ever been. And I had a basic car and I accepted no holidays, but we're okay. And as long as I had that attitude, we carried on and we were okay.
Yeah.
And then one day my attitude changed. I thought, hang on, why can't I? Why can't I earn really good money doing this? So I just put it out to the universe and said, show me how I could earn proper money from this. And I found a book by a woman called, I think, Michelle Lowbridge, who's a wealth person. And she was talking about charging £3,000 a session. And my whole being kind of did not compute that kind of money for one session. And it wasn't just one session. I think it was a little program of 3 to 5 sessions, but still, it was an enormous amount of money. So I started aligning, working towards I'm worth more than I'm charging, and people will pay. And gradually, over the next 2 or 3 years, I was able to increase my income to a really good standard.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have these limiting beliefs that hold us back. And many people do, because we're taught that a proper job will pay you, but to do something you love will not pay you. So if you're a painter, oh, you're going to be a starving artist. If you're a singer, oh, well, you're never going to make it. You're going to starve. Go and get a proper job. It's absolutely ingrained into us that anything we love won't give us proper money.
Yeah.
And we have to break that. We've got to break that cycle, because it's absolutely not true at all.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting to know. So you've not had any health problems since then? You've all been good?
Well, the funny thing is, and I'll say back then, a lot of the scary part about decision making was also because of my husband, right? Because when I first came out as a medium to him, the first thing he said to me was, "You're not going to quit your job, are you?" So I was also carrying his story as well, and just not believing, because again, I hired a business coach thinking that's what you needed to do, and that was her solution too. Just charge $700 a reading. I'm like, I think I was like $70. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, that's not a solution for me. But I will say that I felt very guided by spirit the whole time. Like I felt like I was getting a lot of signs. I felt like, even in the instance where I finally had to make that decision for myself, it was my decision. It was an empowered decision. And I'm glad for that, because when I quit after that, I felt so good about it. And I said to spirit, I don't care what's going to happen. I'm not staying here. I'm going to put it all on red. I am going to do my very best. I told my husband, just give me 6 months to see what I can do, because this work would take me back in a heartbeat too, right? Like, so
Yeah.
honestly, I was like, I just want 6 months to see what I could do. And within that first month, I opened up my books. I mean, I was booked out for 4 months after that. And it's never been a bad decision for me. I think only 1 month out of the 3 years did I make less than I was taking home in corporate. And I'm at the point now where I actually have 3 staff. So I can actually afford to have a lot of help and then create opportunities for other people, because I think that's what wealth is. I think wealth is the ability to give other people opportunities. So I spend most of my profits through Spirit School making positions for other people to be able to kind of like thrive in, right? So
Wow, that's amazing.
yeah, I love it. I love business. I think it's very creative too. I think because I do love spirituality and I love my humanity and my human experience as well. And I think that having a business has been something that has allowed me to express myself in a creative way that I never have before. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? And I think Virgos are particularly good at business because we're such perfectionists. We're so into the detail, and, it's got to be right. And we've got high standards. So we do tend to show that shine in that way, if you like. I think people will notice the professionalism. I mean, I've worked with a lot of people in business who their standards are not mine, shall we say. And I looked at it initially and thought, how are they getting away with this, to be that unprofessional? But they absolutely are, and they're happy and they're thriving. And that was a lesson for me, that you don't have to be that perfect. You don't have to be that good. I remember when I put my first videos up on YouTube readings. I've been doing readings professionally for nearly 20 years. But when I was putting it up on YouTube, I edited it and edited it and edited it and edited it to death. And that went on probably for the first 2 or 3 weeks. And I thought, it takes me, say, 20 minutes to make a video and 3 hours to edit it until it's perfect. And I've got 12 of them to do every week. This is not sustainable.
Yeah.
And then I had to say to myself, well, there was one time it had to go up that day. I didn't have the time. And I had to use the fated words, it'll do. which is very hard for a Virgo to hear. It's very hard for any perfectionist to hear.
Yeah.
But I just trained my brain to accept it'll do.
Yeah.
And I put it up and I thought, well, if people complain, I've done my best. And I know I've done my best, but there we go. And people didn't complain. And that was a shock to me because it wasn't my normal standards, but they were seemed to be happy with it. So I think we do make life harder for ourselves than we need to.
Oh, Virgos for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then health wise, things were really good for a couple of years. I would say last year, what I'm constantly working on in my experiences, like I want to say yes to everyone and I want to create opportunities for everyone. And last year I did get a little bit carried away. I think I had to heal a lot of my people pleasing. I don't think I quite realized how deep that people pleasing goes, that it was showing up in different ways. Like, whereas early in my career, I'd be like going extra or would undercharge, or I would do a lot for free. And I still do a ton for free. Over half of my work is actually for free. And I would create things for people that people would ask for, but then wouldn't invest or whatnot. And I found myself last year, at the end of last year, experiencing burnout for the first time in my career as an entrepreneur, but that's no one's fault but my own. I have a work ethic that is unstoppable. I work just as hard as corporate as I do for myself. I just am like this energizer bunny, my friends say, that like I just have like 4 or 5 projects on the go, and that's how I operate, but I usually do it for other people. So I'm trying to focus my energy back on myself a little bit and like focus on my career, because with Spirit School, it's really about like elevating all these people's experience and exposure so that they could also thrive in this work. But I've been doing it at a detriment to myself. So like even you pitching you, I'm like, let's do a trade. I want to have you on my podcast and I love your work. It's like that for me was even like a big push. To do. So I'm proud of myself, and it's always a learning experience. And if the cycles that we didn't heal them when we left our corporate jobs, they'll come up in our entrepreneurship endeavors and they have to be faced eventually.
Absolutely. I talk about this in my book in the second section on reset, and as a hypnotherapist and, kind of going into the energy as well as the subconscious, these patterns go right back to childhood. And the people pleasing is really about a need for approval and other people's approval being more important than your own. So you need their agreement, their permission for you to be okay with something. So to be able to follow your own approval, even though other people don't agree with you and you're not getting their approval, you're not getting their permission, we then kind of go into a crushed mode of I've upset everybody and guilt and all sorts. And that needs to be reset. And I reset it for people when they go through the book, but also look at responsibilities and boundaries and commitments, because we overcommit, we overgive. We are agreeing to things that we don't have the time or the energy to do. And the key words are to say, not at my detriment. And it's not being selfish, it's self-love and self-care, and to understand the difference that we need to protect ourselves. I did a huge amount of hours in 2020 and 2021, but it was absolutely my choice. I had a goal and I worked towards that goal. The goal was to have my own house. I had the bookings lined up for as long as I wanted them. And I thought, right, well, I will work late, I will work weekends, I will get this money together and I'm going to buy my own house. And I did. And I was pretty tired by then. And I could have stepped back then and reduce my hours. But as a Virgo, the other thing that, and we'll find the same with Taurus and Capricorn as well as earth signs, our environment's really important to us. My home has to be right. And you'll often hear a Virgo say, that doesn't live there, it lives there. And that's out of alignment, moving things half an inch, 2 centimeters, because it's not quite matching. That's a very Virgo trait. So me moving into a new home, I wanted sockets and plugs where there weren't any, and I wanted an electrician. I wanted outside lights for security. I didn't like the color of the kitchen or the floors, so I changed them. And I just kept working till I paid for it all and the house was finished. And then I went, I'm going to step back now. I'm taking out evenings, I'm taking out weekends, and I'm slowing down. And I needed to. So it's okay to do that. And often we find that when we're in the middle of a creative project, you talked about its own engine, its own motivation and passion. And I mean, I can do 18 hours when I'm working on a project. When I was working on my book, drag me off to bed, you know, by my scruff, because I'm in the flow. No, let me alone. Let me do it. Let me do it. So creative projects are beautiful, and we all feel that engine. And it's one of the things in our day job, if we don't feel that passion, if we don't feel that connection, then those 8 hours or whatever hours you work can feel like 100. But when you're doing what you love, 100 hours can feel like one. It's the other way around.
I always say to people too, you have to overcome a lot of fear doing this and making these big decisions to leave. And
Yeah.
as humans, we tend to like to pacify the discomfort and avoid the discomfort, like you were saying earlier. And often what I tell people is whenever you're faced with something that really scares you, one, you should run towards it because it's calling you literally. But what happens in your human experience after you do something that scares you, I have never felt more alive. And that feeling has brought me to tears. It has made me feel emotions and feelings I've never experienced before. Same with signing this lease and getting them to say yes and having people invest in my dream. That was really scary to like put myself out there and make these big commitments. But what I got to experience and feeling an emotion on the other side of that is what I think life is supposed to feel like. And I often look around at people, like even my husband, I love him, bless him, but seeing him go to a job that he's not crazy about every single day, I'm like, man, I feel like there's people who will never get to experience what that feeling is. Now, I'm not a risk taker in the sense where I won't jump out of a plane. You won't catch me bungee jumping. I imagine that's why people do things like that, when really, like, you just need to take a risk. Like, take a risk towards something you're really passionate about and just like, with no guarantee, just see how it works. And then something's going to happen. But that experience, that expansion, you feel that joy that you feel is, I chase that feeling a lot now. So I do run towards things that frighten me a little bit because of that. So when I tell people that and they get to experience it, they see it. And I'm like,
You get
that's
this
life.
immense sense of personal pride, don't you? You feel so proud of yourself because you were scared, but you did it anyway. And then
Yeah.
afterwards, you kind of, yay, go me. I did it. Yay.
Yeah. Well, that was one piece of advice I got from my astrologer when she was like, well, back in 2018, I think like, it's in the stars even for you to be able to go out and do this on your own. So what's keeping you from doing it? And I was like, well, I'm scared. She's like, well, then you'll just have to do it scared. And that to me was like one of like the most profound things I ever heard, because I don't think it occurred to me before that moment. People do things scared.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
was like,
that book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, was and still is an international bestseller, millions and millions of copies. I personally haven't read it, but I've heard of it. Everybody's heard of it. Feel the fear and do it anyway, teaching you that it's all right to be scared, that life wasn't meant to be a series of comfort blankets where you always feel safe and secure to do anything. Because if you did, you'd never grow. I mean, how uncomfortable is it for a leaf to push itself out of a branch that's in hibernation and push out and uncurl and unfurl? I don't know, because it doesn't have emotions, but it has energy. How uncomfortable is it in that energy to push itself wide open and grow? We have that energy, but we also have our emotions and our fears and our patterns and behaviors going, avoid any pain at any cost. Well, then life gets very, very boring and very, very stale very, very quickly. And there's so many people living a life that doesn't fit them anymore. And for many, it never did, but they've settled. And I think that is such a disservice to the amazingness that people are and can be when they give themselves permission to just be all they can be and take risks and push forward. So you and I, we both try to empower people to find their voice and find their truth and find their way forward in whatever way that is. And I work personally and spiritually helping people to grow, and you do much the same, but through the spiritual voice, that as they tap into that, they tap into their own power and say, actually, this feels right, this fits.
yeah. love that.
Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on this podcast. It's new for me, as you know. I've been going just about a month now, and not like your channel here, your podcast at 40,000 hits a month. I'm just reaching 750 at the end of my month. And that's only because I've got a large YouTube channel, and I keep saying to people, come and watch me, come and watch me. And they are coming over and listening, not watching. I'm so used to visual with video that I keep forgetting to say, listen, because most people will listen at the gym or on a walk, walking the dogs, taking the kids to school, doing the dishes, whatever. So I am very blessed to have been invited on your podcast show, and it's an absolute honor to have you on mine. Thank you so much, Danielle.
Thank you, Jeff, for having me, Julie.
You're very welcome. And you'll find all the information about Danielle in the show notes below. And as I said there, you'll find her at squamishmedium.com and obviously on Instagram and on YouTube. So thank you, Danielle. Have an amazing day. Much love.
Thank you.